King Lear is a tragedy written by William Shakespeare. It depicts the gradual descent into madness of the title character, after he disposes of his kingdom, giving bequests to two of his three daughters based on the flattery of him, bringing tragic consequences for all. Derived from the legend of Leir of Britain, a mythological pre-Roman Celtic king, the play has been widely adapted for the stage and motion pictures, with the title role coveted by many of the world's most accomplished actors. Originally drafted in 1605 or 1606 at the latest, with its first known performance on St. Stephen's Day in 1606. The first attribution to Shakespeare was a 1608 publication in a quarto of uncertain provenance. It may be an early draft to simply reflect the first performance text. The Tragedy of King Lear, a more theatrical revision, was included in the 1623 First Folio. Modern editors usually conflate the two, though some insist that each version has its own individual integrity that should be preserved. After the English Restoration, the play was often revised with a happy, non-tragic ending for audiences who disliked its dark and depressing tone. But since the 19th century, Shakespeare's original version has been regarded as one of his supreme achievements. The tragedy is particularly noted for its probing observations on the nature of human suffering and kinship. George Bernard Shaw wrote, "No man will ever write a better tragedy than Lear." Characters: Lear, King of Britain; Goneril, Lear's eldest daughter; Regan, Lear's second daughter; Cordelia, Lear's youngest daughter; Duke of Albany, Goneril's husband; Duke of Cornwall, Regan's husband; Earl of Gloucester, Earl of Kent, later disguised as Keys; Edgar, Gloucester's son; Edmund, Gloucester's illegitimate son; Oswald, Goneril's steward; Fool, Lear's fool; King of France, suitor and later husband to Cordelia; Duke of Burgundy, suitor to Cordelia; Curan, courtier; Old Man, tenant of Gloucester; Officer, employed by Edmund; Gentleman, attends Cordelia; Servants to Cornwall; Knights of Lear's train; Officers, messengers, soldiers, and attendants. Synopsis: King Lear of Britain, elderly and wanting to retire from the duties of the monarchy, decides to divide his realm among his three daughters, and declares he'll offer the largest share to the one who loves him most. The eldest, Goneril, speaks first, declaring her love for her father in fulsome terms. Moved by her flattery, Lear proceeds to grant to Goneril her share as soon as she's finished her declaration, before Regan and Cordelia have a chance to speak. He then awards to Regan her share as soon as she has spoken. When it is finally the turn of his youngest daughter, Cordelia, at first she refuses to say anything and then declares there is nothing to compare her love to, nor words to properly express it. She speaks honestly but bluntly, which infuriates him. In his anger he disinherits Cordelia and divides her share between Regan and Goneril. The Earl of Gloucester and the Earl of Kent observe that, by dividing his realm between Goneril and Regan, Lear has awarded his realm in equal shares to the peerages of the Duke of Albany and the Duke of Cornwall. Kent objects to Lear's unfair treatment of Cordelia. Enraged by Kent's protests, Lear banishes him from the country. Lear then summons the Duke of Burgundy and the King of France, who have both proposed marriage to Cordelia. Learning that Cordelia has been disinherited, the Duke of Burgundy withdraws his suit, but the King of France is impressed by her honesty and marries her nonetheless. Meanwhile, Gloucester has introduced his illegitimate son Edmund to Kent. Lear announces he will live alternately with Goneril and Regan and the husbands. He reserves to himself a retinue of 100 knights to be supported by his daughters. Goneril and Regan speak privately, revealing that the declarations of love were fake, and that they view Lear as a foolish old man. Edmund resents his illegitimate status, and plots to dispose of his legitimate older brother Edgar. He tricks the father Gloucester with a forged letter, making him think Edgar plans to usurp the estate. Kent returns from exile in disguise under the name of Keys, and Lear hires him as a servant. Lear and Keys quarrel with Oswald, Goneril's steward. Lear discovers that now that Goneril has power, she no longer respects him. She orders him to behave better and reduces his retinue. Enraged, Lear departs for Regan's home. The fool mocks Lear's misfortune. Edmund learns from Curin, a courtier, that there is likely to be war between Albany and Cornwall, and that Regan and Cornwall are to arrive at Gloucester's house that evening. Taking advantage of the arrival of the Duke and Regan, Edmund fakes an attack by Edgar, and Gloucester is completely taken in. He disinherits Edgar and proclaims him an outlaw. Bearing Lear's message to Regan, Keys meets Oswald again at Gloucester's home, quarrels with him again, and is put in the stocks by Regan and her husband Cornwall. When Lear arrives, he objects to the mistreatment of his messenger, but Regan is as dismissive of her father as Goneril was. Lear is enraged but impotent. Goneril arrives and supports Regan's argument against him. Lear yields completely to his rage. He rushes out into a storm to rant against his ungrateful daughters, accompanied by the mocking fool. Kent later follows to protect him. Gloucester protests against Lear's mistreatment. With Lear's retinue of 100 knights dissolved, the only companions he has left are his fool and Keys. Wandering on the heath after the storm, Edgar, in the guise of a madman named Tom O'Bedlam, meets Lear. Edgar babbles madly while Lear denounces his daughters. Kent leads them all to shelter. Edmund betrays Gloucester to Cornwall, Regan and Goneril. He reveals evidence that his father knows of an impending French invasion designed to reinstate Lear to the throne, and in fact a French army has landed in Britain. Once Edmund leaves with Goneril to warn Albany about the invasion, Gloucester is arrested, and Regan and Cornwall gouge out Gloucester's eyes. As he is doing so, a servant is overcome with rage by what he is witnessing and attacks Cornwall, mortally wounding him. Regan kills the servant, and tells Gloucester that Edmund betrayed him. Then she turns him out to wander the heath too. Edgar, in his madman's guise, meets his blinded father on the heath. Gloucester, not recognizing him, begs Tom to lead him to a cliff at Dover so that he may jump to his death. Goneril discovers that she finds Edmund more attractive than her honest husband Albany, whom she regards as cowardly. Albany has developed a conscience. He is disgusted by the sisters' treatment of Lear and the mutilation of Gloucester, and denounces his wife. Goneril sends Edmund back to Regan, receiving news of Cornwall's death. She fears her newly widowed sister may steal Edmund and sends him a letter through Oswald. By now alone with Lear, Kent leads him to the French army, which is commanded by Cordelia. But Lear is half mad and terribly embarrassed by his early follies. At Regan's instigation, Albany joins his forces with hers against the French. Goneril's suspicions about Regan's motives are confirmed and returned, as Regan rightly guesses the meaning of her letter and declares to Oswald that she is a more appropriate match for Edmund. Edgar pretends to lead Gloucester to a cliff, then changes his voice and tells Gloucester he has miraculously survived a great fall. Lear appears by now completely mad. He rants that the whole world is corrupt and runs off. Oswald appears, still looking for Edmund. On Regan's orders, he tries to kill Gloucester but is killed by Edgar. In Oswald's pocket, Edgar finds Goneril's letter, in which she encourages Edmund to kill her husband and take her as his wife. Kent and Cordelia take charge of Lear, whose madness quickly passes. Regan, Goneril, Albany, and Edmund meet with the forces. Albany insists that they fight the French invaders but not harm Lear or Cordelia. The two sisters lust for Edmund, who has made promises to both. He considers the dilemma and plots the deaths of Albany, Lear and Cordelia. Edgar gives Goneril's letter to Albany. The armies meet in battle, the British defeat the French, and Lear and Cordelia are captured. Edmund sends Lear and Cordelia off with secret joint orders from him and Goneril for the execution of Cordelia. The victorious British leaders meet, and the recently widowed Regan now declares she will marry Edmund. But Albany exposes the intrigues of Edmund and Goneril and proclaims Edmund a traitor. Regan falls ill, having been poisoned by Goneril, and is escorted off stage, where she dies. Edmund defies Albany, who calls for a trial by combat. Edgar appears masked and in armor, and challenges Edmund to a duel. No one knows who he is. Edgar wounds Edmund fatally, though he does not die immediately. Albany confronts Goneril with a letter which was intended to be his death warrant. She flees in shame and rage. Edgar reveals himself, and reports that Gloucester died off stage from the shock and joy of learning that Edgar is alive. After Edgar revealed himself to his father, off-stage, Goneril, with all her evil plans thwarted, commits suicide. The dying Edmund decides, though he admits it is against his own character, to try to save Lear and Cordelia. However, his confession comes too late. Soon after, Albany sends men to countermand Edmund's orders. Lear enters bearing Cordelia's corpse in his arms, having survived by killing the executioner. Kent appears and Lear now recognizes him. Albany urges Lear to resume his throne, but like Gloucester, the trials Lear has been through have finally overwhelmed him, and he dies. Albany then asks Kent and Edgar to take charge of the throne. Kent declines, explaining that his master is calling him on a journey. Finally, Albany or Edgar implies that he will now become king. Date and text. Although an exact date of composition cannot be given, many academic editors of the play date King Lear between 1603 and 1606. The latest it could have been written as 1606, as the Stationer's Register notes a performance on the 26th of December 1606. The 1603 date originates from words in Edgar's speeches which may derive from Samuel Harsnett's declaration of egregious popish impostures. In his Arden edition, R.A. Folks argues for a date of 1605-6 because one of Shakespeare's sources, the true chronicle history of King Lear, was not published until 1605. Close correspondences between the play and Shakespeare's suggest that he may have been working from a text. Conversely, Frank Commode, in the Riverside Shakespeare, considers the publication of Lear to have been a response to performances of Shakespeare's already written play, noting a sonnet by William Strachey that may have verbal resemblances with Lear. Commode concludes that 1604-5 seems the best compromise. Dr. Navseeb Shaheen dates the play C1605-6 per line 1.2.103. These late eclipses in the sun and moon, which relates to the lunar eclipse of the 27th of September, 1605, and the solar eclipse of the 2nd of October, 1605. The modern text of King Lear derives from three sources, two quartos, published in 1608 and 1619 respectively, and the version in the first folio of 1623. The differences between these versions are significant. Q1 contains 285 lines not in F1. F1 contains around 100 lines not in Q1. Also, at least 1,000 individual words are changed between the two texts. Each text has a completely different style of punctuation, and about half the verse lines in the F1 are either printed as prose or differently divided in the Q1. The early editors, beginning with Alexander Pope, simply conflated the two texts, creating the modern version that has remained nearly universal for centuries. The conflated version is born from the presumption that Shakespeare wrote only one original manuscript, now unfortunately lost, and that the quarto and folio versions are distortions of that original. As early as 1931, Madeleine Doran suggested that the two texts had basically different provenances, and that these differences between them were critically interesting. This argument, however, was not widely discussed until the late 1970s, when it was revived, principally by Michael Warren and Gary Taylor. The thesis, while controversial, has gained significant acceptance. It posits essentially that the quarto derives from something close to Shakespeare's foul papers, and the folio is drawn in some way from a prompt book, prepared for production by Shakespeare's company or someone else. In short, Q1 is authorial, F1 is theatrical. In criticism, the rise of revision criticism has been part of the pronounced trend away from mid-century formalism. The New Cambridge Shakespeare has published separate editions of Q and F. The most recent Pelican Shakespeare edition contains both the 1608 quarto and the 1623 folio text, as well as a conflated version. The New Arden edition, edited by R.A. Folks, is the only recent edition to offer the traditional conflated text. Both Anthony Nuttall of Oxford University and Harold Bloom of Yale University have endorsed the view of Shakespeare having revised the tragedy at least once during his lifetime. As Bloom indicates, at the close of Shakespeare's revised King Lear, a reluctant Edgar becomes King of Britain, accepting his destiny but in the accents of despair. Nuttall speculates that Edgar, like Shakespeare himself, usurps the power of manipulating the audience by deceiving poor Gloucester. Analysis and criticism. Analysis and criticism of King Lear over the centuries has been extensive. Historicist interpretations. John F. Danby, in his Shakespeare's Doctrine of Nature, a study of King Lear, argues that Lear dramatizes, among other things, the current meanings of nature. The words nature, natural, and unnatural occur over 40 times in the play, reflecting a debate in Shakespeare's time about what nature really was like. This debate pervades the play and finds symbolic expression in Lear's changing attitude to thunder. There are two strongly contrasting views of human nature in the play, that of the Lear party, exemplifying the philosophy of Bacon and Hooker, and that of the Edmund party, akin to the views later formulated by Hobbes. Along with the two views of nature, Lear contains two views of reason, brought out in Gloucester and Edmund's speeches on astrology. The rationality of the Edmund party is one with which a modern audience more readily identifies, but the Edmund party carries bold rationalism to such extremes that it becomes madness, a madness in reason, the ironic counterpart of Lear's reason in madness, and the fool's wisdom in folly. This betrayal of reason lies behind the play's later emphasis on feeling. The two natures and the two reasons imply two societies. Edmund is the new man, a member of an age of competition, suspicion, glory, in contrast with the older society which has come down from the Middle Ages, with its belief in cooperation, reasonable decency, and respect for the whole as greater than the part. King Lear is thus an allegory. The older society, that of the medieval vision, with its doting king, falls into error, and is threatened by the new Machiavellianism. It is regenerated and saved by a vision of a new order, embodied in the king's rejected daughter. Cordelia, in the allegorical scheme, is threefold: a person, an ethical principle, and a community. Nevertheless, Shakespeare's understanding of the new man is so extensive offensivist to amount almost to sympathy. Edmund is the last great expression in Shakespeare of that side of Renaissance individualism, the energy, the emancipation, the courage, which has made a positive contribution to the heritage of the West. He embodies something vital which a final synthesis must reaffirm. But he makes an absolute claim which Shakespeare will not support. It is right for man to feel, as Edmund does, that society exists for man, not man for society. It is not right to assert the kind of man Edmund would erect to this supremacy. The play offers an alternative to the feudal Machiavellian polarity, an alternative foreshadowed in France's speech, in Lear and Gloucester's prayers, and in the figure of Cordelia. Until the decent society is achieved, we are meant to take as role model Edgar, the Machiavel of goodness, endurance, courage and ripeness. Psychoanalytic and psychosocial interpretations. Since there are no literal mothers in King Lear, Lear Khan provides a psychoanalytic interpretation of the maternal subtext found in the play. According to Khan, Lear in his old age regresses to an infantile disposition, and now seeks for a love that is normally satisfied by a mothering woman. Her characterization of Lear is that of a child being mothered, but without real mothers, his children become the daughter-mother figures. Lear's contest of love serves as the binding agreement. His daughters will get their inheritance provided they care for him, especially Cordelia, on whose kind nursery he will greatly depend. Her refusal to love him as more than a father is often interpreted as a resistance from incest. The Khan also inserts the image of a rejecting mother. The situation is now a reversal of parent-child roles, in which Lear's madness is essentially a childlike rage from being deprived of maternal care. Even when Lear and Cordelia are captured together, this madness persists as Lear envisions a nursery in prison, where Cordelia's sole existence is for him. However, it is Cordelia's death that ultimately ends his fantasy of a daughter-mother, as the play ends with only male characters left. Sigmund Freud asserted that Cordelia symbolizes death. Therefore, when the play begins with Lear rejecting his daughter, it can be interpreted as him rejecting death. Lear is unwilling to face the finitude of his being. The play's poignant ending scene, wherein Lear carries the body of his beloved Cordelia, was of great importance to Freud. In this scene, she causes in Lear a realization of his finitude, or as Freud put it, she causes him to make friends with the necessity of dying. It is logical to infer that Shakespeare had special intentions with Cordelia's death, as he was the only writer to have Cordelia kill. Alternatively, an analysis based on Adlerian theory suggests that the king's contest among his daughters in Act 1 has more to do with his control over the unmarried Cordelia. In his study of the character portrayal of Edmund, Harold Bloom refers to him as Shakespeare's most original character. As Hazlitt pointed out, writes Bloom, Edmund does not share in the hypocrisy of Goneril and Regan. His Machiavellianism is absolutely pure and lacks an Oedipal motive. Freud's vision of family romances simply does not apply to Edmund. Iago is free to reinvent himself every minute, yet Iago has strong passions, however negative. Edmund has no passions whatsoever. He has never loved anyone, and he never will. In that respect, he is Shakespeare's most original character. The tragedy of Lear's lack of understanding of the consequences of his demands and actions is often observed to be like that of a spoiled child. But it has also been noted that his behavior is equally likely to be seen in parents who have never adjusted to the children having grown up. Christianity critics are divided on the question of whether or not King Lear represents an affirmation of Christian doctrine. Among those who argue that Lear is redeemed in the Christian sense through suffering are A.C. Bradley and John Rebertons, who has written, "Through his sufferings, Lear has won an enlightened soul." Other critics who find no evidence of redemption and emphasize the horrors of the final act include John Holloway and Marvin Rosenberg. William R. Elton stresses the pre-Christian setting of the play, writing that Lear fulfills the criteria for pagan behavior in life, falling into total blasphemy at the moment of his irredeemable loss. Fairy tales. In the first edition of Kinder und Hausmärchen by the Brothers Grimm, the Anhang entry to No. 71 Princess Mouseskin included a note, "As the father here, so asks King Lear his daughter." The English translation of this story by Oliver Lew begins as follows: "A king had 3 daughters. Thereon he wanted to know which loved him most. Let them come in front of him and asked them. The eldest spoke, she loved him more than the whole kingdom. The second, more than all the precious stones and pearls in the world. But the third said, she loved him more than salt. The king was so upset that she compared her love of him with such a small thing, gave her to a servant and commanded he should take her into the forest and kill her." Rex Warner. Rex Warner's book, Men of Stones, a melodrama written in the aftermath of the Greek Civil War, depicts imprisoned Greek leftists presenting King Lear in the prison camp, and has various allusions and comparisons between the protagonist's situation and the play's plot and characters.